During the scamdemic, the nationwide shutdown imposed by the ANC elite crippled small business, amongst the most affected with the tourist industry, which battled with closed borders, bans on alcohol, and curfew levels, which meant few could visit their establishments anyway. For those of you who may recall, the tourist minister at the time, don't worry, Princess Lesulu, we don't mean you, created a fund in April of 2020, which would offer small businesses a once-off loan of 50,000 Rand in the form of a small business loan. The catch was that the business which applied would have to be BEE accredited, which effectively meant you could gain assistance from the government, but only if you were black. The rationale given at the time was that effectively the beneficiaries of the apartheid regime, the Whiteys, were rich and could afford the lockdown measures. The previously disadvantaged were poor and therefore couldn't afford the measures, so they had to be helped the most. The deputy minister at the time commented that it was a pity that some people had tended to understand transformation in a negative sense of it undermining free market principles and slowing down the momentum of hard-won gains in the tourist sector or the broader economy as a whole. To the contrary, we as the ANC see transformation as a necessary tool of nation building and social cohesion, which helps us address the imbalances of the past. It helps us to ensure people who were historically excluded from the sector of the economy also find a fair share of participation. Solidarity and AfriForum challenged the eligibility criteria, arguing that it effectively meant that whilst the scamdemic affected all, and that we were, I quote, all in it together, we were in fact not all in it together. The rule specifically stated that unless your business held over 51% of black management, it did not qualify for assistance. AfriForum argued that the government was destroying white-owned tourist businesses, whilst the fund only supported black-owned establishments, and that this ultimately was unconstitutional. In response, the government fought back and argued that AfriForum was racist and anti-transformational. The tourist minister at the time argued that broad-based black economic empowerment was never designed to exclude established businesses or South Africans, but to level the playing field in the economy. As government, we remain steadfast in our commitment to advancing the transformation agenda through creating equitable opportunities as we strive to create an inclusive and revived tourist economy as part of our country's economic reconstruction and recovery plan. So basically commie bullshit. At the time, the president even chimed in and on the topic said that government and other supporters of economic transformation were in the throes of a battle against enemies of progress, and those who opposed the transformation had to be defeated. We will need to review our BBBEEE strategy as part of the act to develop a new strategy, because we cannot continue to live in a country where black people do not own the levers of control of the economy. This needs to be changed, the president said. Now, for those of you who are unaware, the argument of levers of control is a Marxist doctrine. Who knew? The rules were ultimately challenged and went to court. The High Court initially ruled that the rules were valid. The judge dismissed the application by the parties, stating that the criteria of BBBEEE codes of good practice did not perpetuate unfair advantage by black companies. He agreed with the department that the economic impact of the coronavirus pandemic will result in the closure of black businesses and would undermine and set back transformation. He found nothing racial or shameful in the inclusion of BBBEEE in the criteria as the applicants sought to suggest. In short, the High Court felt that applying race-based criteria to relief was perfectly justified. Unfortunately, this type of judgment is not uncommon in the High Court, which leads many to question the competency of the High Court as a whole, and whether it remains captured. I'll leave it for you to speculate on your own. The matter was ultimately appealed to the Supreme Court, which ruled that, and it is important to quote, that the purposes of the Disaster Management Act on the one hand, and the BBBEEE Act on the other, are very different, and that each statute is directed at achieving different goals. The Disaster Management Act is aimed at preventing or limiting disasters, mitigating their impact and enabling post-disaster recovery, while the BBBEEE Act is aimed at promoting black economic empowerment in order to enable black people to participate meaningfully in the economy. The Supreme Court ruled that it is clear that the ministers were in no doubt as to the purpose of her direction. In other words, she knew exactly what she was doing. The minister stated that the purpose of the fund was to provide grant assistance to small businesses in the tourism industry to mitigate the impact of COVID-19 in order to ensure their sustainability. However, it was not open to the minister to justify the inclusion of BBBEEE status levels. So in other words, it was perfectly okay for them to create the grant system, which is what they were required to do under the Disaster Management Act, but including race-based rules was outside of the scope. Thank you, Supreme Court, for some level-headed thinking. The government is often keen to point out that the Constitution provides for recognizing the injustices of the past and to heal the divisions of the past and establish a society based on democratic values, social justice, and fundamental human rights. But, as we all know, this effectively means that the government tends to adopt a redistributive economic approach which is based on race nationalism, specifically black race nationalism. The government, not one to take the defeat lying down, appealed to the Constitutional Court, which today ruled that they would not review the case, as they felt that they had nothing further to add. BE, they determined, could not be applied to relief grants. This government, this ANC government, are desperate to hold on to race nationalism. Their argument always appears to be the same. The previously advantaged must now suffer and make way for the previously disadvantaged. But the issue ignores one fact, and that is that the previously advantaged already pay towards the development and the upkeep of the state, namely through their taxes. A very small number of individuals pay the majority of taxes in the state, and those taxes are ultimately redistributed back towards the previously disadvantaged in the form of a social welfare grant. Lest we forget that the government is proud of the one thing that it has created over its tenure, and that is the welfare system, and that's of the grant state. It is arguable that the previously advantaged have paid more than their fair share towards the reparations of the previously disadvantaged. They have done this through their taxes on their wealth and their labour, specifically PAYE. Those taxes have often been stolen by the black nationalists, but this does not negate the fact that they have nevertheless been paid. The government needs to halt its racist policies. You cannot expect those who bear the greater share of the tax responsibilities to stick around having their money stolen whilst getting nothing back in return. And this is in fact what we are seeing. As pointed out in Business Tech, the actual numbers of those taxpayers leaving are not of an economic importance, but rather are an illustration of people losing confidence in the system itself. This lack of confidence shows us that the tax base does not agree with the government and feels that the government has now gone too far. Immigration should never be an option of South Africans. It splits families, denies them a culture and historical identities, and renders entire generations of siblings to visitors in foreign lands. For those of us who are born here, many of us third and fourth generation South Africans, this is our home. The ANC continues to shout about, give us back the land thieves, beneficiaries of apartheid, but continues to apply more race-based laws and steals far more than their predecessors. This is not to say that the apartheid regime was good, but rather that it is time for us to perhaps drop the bullshit and enable all citizens of the state to actively participate in the economy without the hurdles of state-mandated discrimination. I, for one, would like to thank Solidarity and AfriForum for the cases that they bring against the government to get them to stop the discrimination. And for those of you who haven't already, maybe you should consider joining both organizations and support the work that they do.